Welcome to the From Foster to Blank podcast, where we're highlighting former foster youth who have discovered their passion in life and creating their own purpose by redefining what success means to them. It's almost like a Where Are They Now podcast. Within every single story, we will see different people highlight what inspired them to change the direction of their life and how they achieve their own goals by redefining what success is. The best part is everyone is going to have a different definition of what success is, and we get to learn from them. The other neat part is that every single one of these people are going to highlight what they do, and they're going to give advice on how they got there. This is an educational podcast for people that are like you and me, foster care kids, but we're going to see it from a different lens of positivity. So here we go.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the From Foster to Blank podcast. We are going to make mistakes today, and it's great. Today I have Dr. Cobb with me. I am so excited to dig in, ask her some questions, and then get to know her. So the first question that I have is, what do you do?
So I'm Dr. Cobbs. I'm actually an educator. I work with teachers to give them best practices to improve their instruction, and I'll be transitioning to coordinate the different professional development that the district will offer teachers.
And is this K through 12 or is this college? Oh my gosh. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what exactly with the best practices, what do you do? Like, what does that mean for someone?
For example, my last stint was at an elementary school. And so I will go into a classroom where, let's say, the principal says, hey, I have some teachers and things are kind of going in a different direction, and I need you to go in and support them. And then I go in, I observe, and I provide feedback and some strategies that they can utilize in the classroom. And then sometimes I go straight in the moment and help with kids. I feel like a celebrity in the building because the kids know my name and they're like, hey, Connie, But it's really just because they see my face a lot and they see me kind of more hands-on in the class with them. So that's really the best practice that's put in place. It's just modeling the expected strategies that we want teachers to implement for kids to learn best.
I love that. Okay. And so when you're looking at strategies, are you like, what are some of those strategies that help the teachers to help the students?
So mostly I focus a lot on engagement. I focus on engagement, and I really focus on this because when I was in foster care, I would be in the class and no one knew that I was in foster care. And so when I work with teachers, I always teach them that doesn't matter where the kid comes from. They should feel like they can be successful in your room. And so I assess, what does that kid need to feel successful in doing, and what can you do to make them feel that way? And a lot of times it's feeling a sense of belonging. So I give them strategies on how to build a classroom culture that's a community. And that could be having jobs for children. That could be having incentives to encourage positive behavior. A lot of times the teachers that I've worked with over the years, they feel like the kids are not learning because they just can't. But a lot of times the anxieties that they have, and I've always worked in lower poverty environment schools. And so a lot of kids come from a lot of trauma. They come from a lot of things that are just very challenging for a little baby body to be experiencing. And they have these big emotions for their little bodies, and they're coming to class expected to still produce. And I would say to them, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we know their hierarchy of needs are not even being honored. So how can we, if you're hungry, you're not going to function and learn. So just getting them, so building stuff for cultural building, and we call this in pedagogy, it's more like culturally responsive pedagogy, where you look at the kids that you're supporting and you give them access or a way in to access the curriculum. So based on the type of children that you're serving, where they may leave your school building, go home, and they don't have access to reading materials, or they may not have parents who'll sit down and read with them, but that shouldn't keep them from performing in your class. So that looks like giving teachers strategies to engage them. I use a lot of music, a lot of movement activities, because if you have a lot of things going on neurologically, you need to be able to move your body, and you will start to commit whatever you're learning to memory better.
I love all of this. Oh my gosh. So you said, and I think this is something we often forget with anyone who's gone through trauma, is that there are big emotions that come with trauma. And oftentimes for anyone that's, I would say, 20 or lower, sometimes even myself. But really before I understood why I had big emotions in my little tiny person, I wasn't able to come into the classroom to produce. That's the same thing with work too. Like when you've gone through trauma, you can't expect yourself to be like on top of everything all the time and be like, yeah, I'm great. Like trauma, if it impacts us as an adult really hard, imagine what a child has experienced with those big emotions and then said, hey, sit here for a second. And you're like, hey, let's move your body to get like that energy. And sometimes it's bad energy out of your system. Sometimes it's like, it's just maybe they're feeling sad. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just like, I have all this energy and I just need to move. And you're like, okay, let's get that energy so that you can sit here and focus for a second. Now, you are Miss Dr. Cobb. Now, you also said you're foster care. So let's hit on this for a second, because in the foster care community nationally, we know the horrible statistics for education. For high school, it's 50% of high school foster youth are being able to graduate from high school. Now, college is around 3%. For a bachelor's or an associate's degree or a certificate. They were kind of merging that together because they realized that number can be a lot higher when we honor all of the successes. But then you went through your master's and your doctoral program. That is we're anomalies. And really, like nationally, if people don't know, and I think we need to sit on this for a second, nationally, doctoral holders are it's under 2% of a doctoral national general population. Now, foster care, we don't have a number because it doesn't exist, because it's so small, but there is a small group of us who were able to do it. When you did your study, how much of that, how did that feel? Because you really are focused on your study for best practices with working with students. So how was that? Because I'll share my study in a second, but that hit me. So what is that like? What was that like going through your dissertation research and being like, this is my topic? Like, what did you see and hear and feel when you were going through that? Because that's a lot.
So first of all, congrats to you as well. And this is the thing. I never thought about it until you just said it. And I guess to me, I'm a very spiritual person. So I guess that's the reason why we go through stuff. So we can not only live this experience, but we get to honor others and help others. And so for me, my research focused on building teachers' feelings of self-efficacy. And what that looked like was working with teachers because they just said, Cobb, I don't know what to do. I am literally struggling with the kids I serve and I don't know how to help them. And I focused on teachers in the 0 to 5 year range in their practice or new to the role that they were in. And so this is what happened for me. That was how I started. And then the pandemic hit. And all of my teachers that were veterans, they said, oh my God, I need help. And at the time I was working in technology. I was teaching a computer class and they didn't know how to use the computer. They didn't know how to engage kids virtually. They could see into their homes and they saw where they came from. And they were just like, oh my gosh. And so I had to revise all of my research because then I had to create something specifically for the time that we were in. And what that looked like was focusing on trauma, focusing on culturally responsive teaching, focusing on getting better with technology, teaching reading and literacy practices virtually, and then how to help a child self-regulate. So I used a lot of social emotional learning, and those were the theories that I focused on. And mine was also related to change theory. And so what I ended up saying was, hey, administrators, school district leaders, if you begin to find authentic professional development experiences for teachers, things that they actually find relevant and can actually utilize in their classrooms, they're not only going to feel better about what they're doing, they're going to produce the results that you need to know that your kids are learning.
Okay, so I almost lost it when you said seeing into their homes.
Yeah.
That had to hit some teachers to really see what their homes were like during the pandemic. How do you walk through that with teachers? Like, I'm gonna lose it. So just you go, girl. Like, I'm like, wow, because oh, that's a lot. That's heavy. Like, that had to have been an eye-opening thing for some teachers. And so how did you walk them through that?
Well, first of all, I experienced it too because I started in the classroom. I hadn't been promoted yet. And so when we first transitioned, I was literally teaching the kids, and we had a big, strong English language learner population. And so the kids were just new coming to America, and they were like multiple families living in one home and sharing rooms. You could see the kids whose parents were trying to work from home and support them. You could see the kids, literally, I had girls, I was teaching fourth grade at one particular point, and I had girls holding their siblings on the camera, because they just had to still help the family, but they still needed to learn. And so when I transitioned roles, the one thing I had to tell my teachers is, we're not going to just be surviving. We need to navigate this pandemic and thrive. And so my role was to take them from surviving to thriving. And that looked like, you have certain kids that don't have access to technology. So I was literally grabbing materials, binding packets for families to come and pick up. Literally we had parents that would come to the school and say, hey, I can't do this math. And so we started having to have virtual math sessions, and we had to have extra manipulatives sent home to help the parents with their children. And so a lot of the teachers that I supported, especially in the younger years, the younger grades, kindergarten through second grade, they just couldn't keep their attention. They didn't know how to really get buy-in. But when I tell you, the number one thing that I worked with them on was engagement, strategies for kids, quick mini lessons, get them in and get them out, but also how to actually connect with the parents. A lot of times as a teacher, you think that everything that you do in the home translates to whatever needs to happen at home. I mean, in school translates to what needs to happen at home, but a lot of times parents didn't have good experiences in school, so they shy away from coming into the building. They shy away from participating. So then you add technology deficits, to that. So they just weren't really comfortable with making those types of connections. And it was really an eye-opening experience because it was humbling. And it was probably the most authentic glimpse that we had of what our kids actually experienced. And you can see some of the barriers and disparities as to why we had so many kids not performing prior to being virtual in the pandemic. And then once we returned, that was an entire different shift because we had half kids in, half kids out. We had kids that were, so many families, people lost members. Like, it was just so much. It was, I'm telling you, my research, it took me so much to pass IRB, but it was the most timely moment of history. Like, I could not even, what I originally worked on would have never been as impactful as it was having gone through that experience.
So you keep saying the phrase, and I know what culturally relevant teaching is because I've worked with students who work with that. But can you explain, because I think sometimes people think cultural as like how people, where they come from, their family heritage, but cultural responsive teaching is so much more. And I don't think a lot of people understand it. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so culturally responsive teaching is having the ability as an educator to take the children that you're serving,
Mm,
their backgrounds, their linguistic ability, their preferences, their personality type,
mm,
their desires, all of what makes that child who that child is into consideration when you are creating lessons and you are teaching things that are supposed to help them master a standard. So, for example, I used to have a class that was um, considered a repeaters class. So
mm,
at the time, I was 25 and I was teaching 11th grade English, but I had kids in my class that were 18 and 19 because they were seniors who hadn't passed and needed to repeat my class. I
yeah.
wasn't that much older than them. I went and I student taught at a magnet school, but now I had to work with kids who were multiple grade levels below in reading,
Mm,
who were on the verge of being kicked out of school, and some of them were even involved in gang activity.
mm,
So I had to come and teach them literature. Now, in the American literature curriculum, I had to teach everything from American history that aligns. But I had to find a frame of reference that would give them the opportunity to understand what I was teaching them, but also to keep them engaged. And the
mm.
way that I did that was using, if I'm teaching theme, I used the music of the time. And at that time, there's a rapper T.I. who was very popular. And I would use his music. I would use Tupac. I would use Rihanna. I would use people that the kids could connect with now, even though I was trying to teach it to a historical text that we were learning from the 18 or 1900s.
I love that.
So
Yeah.
that's a part of being culturally responsive. It's taking whatever you have in front of you, and it's not a one size fits all approach,
Right.
and then saying, I believe that you still need to learn,
Mm.
and I'm going to find an access point to help you still learn what I need to teach you.
So it's taking, instead of teaching something that is maybe disconnected from what they're doing and looking at it as a holistic approach, you're taking into their environment, their home life, their ability to speak the language, where they're actually at academically, their learning style, and everything else. It's a holistic side to teaching that we don't often hear people take. Um, Okay. So you also mentioned that a lot of the parents struggled with technology. Now, you said you were in a lower income school, correct?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about some of the challenges of like access to computers, tutoring, things like that. Like, what are the challenges that your students have faced at a low income school that may not be experienced at a other school that has money to get computers for home and things like that?
Yeah. So essentially, a lot of schools that, I've worked in mostly all low performing schools, high school, elementary. And what I have found is that at home, they may not have access to things. And
Mm,
so what we have started doing is writing grants. In the state of Georgia, they have the Department of Education will partner with schools to give a GOSA grant or the personalized learning grant. And within that, they get one-to-one devices. And some schools get to also check out that device to children, and their parents just sign some kind of form of liability, and they might take out insurance. And then that way, that device can go back and forth to school.
mhm.
At the school I served in, we during the pandemic especially, we had devices doubled. So we had devices that stayed in the building and devices that could go home.
Oh,
And
wow.
most of those we recovered, but some did not. And you just, we were like, that's a pandemic. And that happened. but they were older computers that we can send home. But a lot of times, the biggest thing that I'm noticing is the tutoring availability. So some schools, they have what we call 21st century, or they might have, excuse me, they might have other ways of getting the kids to be involved by doing enrichment, after school programming, just different ways that not only can they feel like they're still a part of the school community, but inviting parents to come and learn. And a lot of the lower income schools, they have what we call a parent facilitator or a parent engagement specialist. And the role of this person is to identify a targeted need that that school has. And then they will say, now this is how we're going to start building the programs to invite parents in. And a lot of times what that looks like is having sit downs, having opportunity to learn what the literacy programs are and what some of the strategies are, working with the math department and just curriculum components, because a lot of what they are doing is saying, hey, we want to invite you in and we want you to feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm. And you're helping the parents in order to help the student at home.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to that, like, we would hope that things translate from the school to the home. And we realized during the pandemic that was not happening. Before, we just didn't realize the extent of it until like the pandemic kind of blew the lid off and was like, here's everything. And that's overwhelming as a teacher. So I can't imagine what that was like for you guys sitting in that. I mean, I heard a lot of funny stories from teachers of like parents walking behind the screen in their underwear or like cussing or something like that. But then there's this real thing where it's like you're saying, like, some of these kids were holding their baby siblings and being like, I'm here, I'm present, and I'm trying, but this is a reality that I have to be here. And parents working from home. And I can just imagine, like, I mean, the way I was raised was chaotic, and my education was chaotic until I got to high school, and it still was chaotic, but not as bad. But like, I can only imagine what it was like then to have like 100 voices in the house on computers all at the same time. Like, that's a lot. It's overwhelming, and that's a disruption to education. So during the pandemic, did you guys see like an increase from what you guys were doing? Did you see an increase in student performance because you guys implemented all of this stuff?
No, we did not. What we saw was either we lost or we maintained. And the kids, because out of the class of 26, some teachers had 7 that might come on virtually, and we might see kids that just checked out. They just wouldn't communicate. They, life happened.
Yeah.
And the connection, it was hard. And, we weren't taking attendance, systematically. It was not a punishment if you couldn't show up.
Good.
And so that was a big barrier to getting kids comfortable and, adjusting to what we were doing.
Hard.
And I'm just thinking back because I remember I transitioned to 3 different roles during that span. I was teaching computer literacy when we went out, and literally that was the hardest thing to do because they couldn't use the computer correctly, and I'm trying to teach them how to use the computer
virtually, of all things. Like, it's so hard to teach virtually how to use a computer. It's like, push this button. What? You're like, oh my God, I'm really trying to help. Like, it's hard to teach someone computer virtually. It does not help.
So I went from that to 4th grade, and that was 4th grade reading and social studies. And that was so challenging because I'm literally trying to take kids and send them into breakout rooms to do their writing and try to have book talks. And then I'm trying to tutor in another breakout room. I have my own son in a breakout room so I can support him. And I felt like a DJ. Yes. And then we left that, and then I became an academic coach where I was training teachers, and I'm hearing all the stuff that they were experiencing and going back to administration and saying, hey, these are their challenges. And they were just dealing with personal stuff too.
Yeah. Because a lot of
They
teachers
were
are
just,
in their own families and working from home too. And I like that you gave that visual of a DJ. But this was like, I'm gonna be honest, like for me at least, that DJ, like you think like you're like, look, like this is so good, and like we're dancing in the club, and then like all of a sudden it's like, no, this is crush and burn. And like that's how most
yeah.
people felt, was like, I'm just trying to keep things from not being on fire while it's on fire. Like everything is on fire. So so you switched 3 roles, and like, oh, that sounds exhausting. I'm exhausted hearing that. Like, I'm like, oh my God, like it's flashing back on COVID. But you seem to have hit it on the head of like, this is what my job was to do, was, and you did it well. Like you were coaching teachers at that 3rd level. So
Yeah.
how do you do that while having life on fire? Because I still feel like people are still in that, even though most of us are back in person. I feel like there are still a lot of challenges that the education community is feeling because of the pandemic.
Oh, it's really hard. The job I'm going to now do is at the district level. And so I am so blessed because I've gotten to see the beginning to now. And from this vantage point, I've literally been planning, okay, what do our new teachers need to experience? What do they need to do? Like my first plan of action, we need to do neighborhood tours. They need to know their kids' environment. They need to know the data from their testing scores. They need to understand who they're dealing with. Because you cannot teach a child anything until you know what can keep them from learning whatever it is that is coming up. And
Yes.
so that's really been my train of thought. And it's been such a beautiful thought to consider, like, oh my gosh, like I used to wonder, think, hope, and now I get to help impact change. And the number one thing that I'm considering is I have lived this experience, and I see that evidence of we are behind. And more importantly, the administrators, a lot of our administrators have been so far removed from the classroom, so they didn't even know what was going on. They were just like, they're not doing what they need to do, fix it. And I was like, hey, this lady is barely even coming to work. She's struggling. Her own child is sick with COVID. We had one of our teachers, her infant got COVID. And so those kinds of things. So humanizing what's going on, connecting with administrators to see, when your teacher's not performing, it's probably something else as to why they're not performing. And that's okay.
So it's, oh my gosh, this is like a ripple. If your teachers aren't doing well, your students are not doing well. So you have to support your teachers and find and see them holistically so that they can see the student holistically. It's a domino effect. And we know, because the foster care is a domino effect, like we know what the foster care system does. And I think that a lot of the times when we've gone through that type of life and then we get into the roles that we're in, we show up with a lot more grace, and we're able to educate those who might not know what it's like and say like, hey, they are doing the best that they can, and here's how we're supporting them. But this is, if they can just get to class today and say hi everybody, that's a win. And that's amazing. I love that. Like look at, oh my gosh, I'm just so proud. Like I have all the things I just want to say. Like we could literally stay on this all day. Okay, so that kind of goes into our second question though. So for you, as a foster youth and a teacher and an advocate within your community, how do you define success?
So, I graduated high school 20 years ago now. This is my reunion week. And I didn't think about this before because it was just a vision that I had. I just knew I wanted a different life. I aged out of the system. So I was in there from birth. Literally, when my mother gave me birth, I was placed into custody. And I stayed until I was 18 years old, and I went to college. And I didn't know anybody else who had gone to college. I didn't understand anything. So my first vantage point was a music video. And in that music video, the young lady had on a shirt, and that shirt said Spelman. And when I saw that, I said, I don't know what that school is, but if it's going to make a woman look like that, she looks like a nice young lady, I'm going to go to this school. And I applied, and I was like happy I got in. I couldn't even believe it. And it's an all-girls school. And so I learned a lot of cultural traditions. I learned a lot of stuff about networking. I learned about learning who I was as a person. And I really got remothered. And not having had that experience, that was my first sense of stability. I felt like I was belonging, that was family, and it was community. So part of that became ingrained in my identity. And so when I became an educator, I took that with me, that I want my children in my class to feel community, belonging, safety, home. And that was like that. I didn't care what I taught as long as I can produce those feelings. And that meant that I accept them. I accept them for who they are. And I literally would get lauded because there would be kids who had the most behavioral issues, or they had a lot of trauma that they experienced. And they would say, oh, we're going to put them in Cobbs class. And I was like, I need to make it my business to teach every child that comes in my room, because I don't want to feel like they are not going to thrive in this space. And so that became my goal. And so to me, I don't know if you ever arrive at a place where you say, I'm successful, but I think that being goal-oriented and having markers of achievement is really what you need to be striving for. And it looks different at every phase of your life. And so at this juncture, I'm sitting here like 20 years later, I feel successful that I've earned several degrees. I feel successful that I'm in the career field that I set out to do. But I'm really going to feel successful when I am a superintendent of a school district, and I am really impacting policy, and I am really making sure that nationally we are ranking, and that we are really doing things that we need to do to move kids to where they need to go academically. But that comes later. So the here and now is continuing to grow. That's success. Continuing to build relationships and network is success. Continuing to hone my craft as a leader is success. And always remembering where I came from. And the pandemic helped me, because when I saw so many people losing their jobs, and I felt so safe in education, but I resigned. So I transitioned to the job. I moved, relocated. I did so much, but it was all based on faith. And I said to myself, wherever I want to go next, I have to have the ability to believe it is attainable and I can do that. And the only way that I felt that way is because I knew I had a bank, a currency, if you will, of skills and ability that would get me to launch where I needed to go. So to me, I think that is the marker of success, knowing your craft, what you do, and how you add value. And when you go into any space, and I always would say this, you put me on any team, I know I can thrive. I may not know how exactly yet, but I have the mental fortitude and the determination that it will happen. And I'll put in the fire, I'll put in the hard work, and I'll put in the grit, and I don't back down from the challenge. And so that's what makes us, when you think about being in foster care, it is a sense of resiliency that you build, that it's traumatic, it is scary, it is so difficult. But when you get to the other side, you have literally climbed a mountain. And the only thing you can think of, well, here's another mountain yet to climb. And I can do it because I've done that. And I did that without realizing what I was doing. Absolutely. So I don't want to add pressure to people, but I just think that success is really in the eye of the beholder. And as long as you're not looking at what everyone else is doing and imagining things that are not according to you, it's tunnel vision. You put those blinders on, and this is where I'm going, and that's what I'm doing, and that's how I'm going to get there. And I'm going to keep going until I get it. And once I get to that point, how do we add to that list? And we keep going.
I love that. You said, yeah, I mean, you didn't straight say it, but you alluded to it that you said success is continuing to see that it is attainable, that
Yeah.
whatever that goal is. And then earlier you said you are known by your students when you walk in the building. And that
Yeah.
was something that you took from when you were in school, from college, and then you brought it in and they know who you are, but they know you know them. And then
Yeah.
you said, you make it my business. I make it my business to go out and make sure that what they need is it is a part of my business. And it's not something
Yeah.
that I'm just trying to do. It's because you want to see them go and continue to see that it's attainable. And yeah, foster care makes us have to be, I think it makes us fighters, but we have that choice. Like we know the reality of a lot of people in going through the foster care system and kind of just stopping where they're at. But our hope is that we could see that there are so many different definitions of success, so many different areas that we can go and be. But if we look at what we're wanting, like you said, you had a vision beforehand to say, okay, I want to do something like this. And you
Yeah.
went for it. That's all it takes is for us to define that ourselves, is to say, you know what, I'm going to say my success is continuing to see it as attainable. It's going to be hard. I have another mountain to climb and it's going to suck sometimes. And there are going to be times that I'm going to look at that mountain and say again, but you followed it up with, I've already come up this mountain. I can do this one too. And that's a
Yeah.
mindset change. Like we have to get there to say, if we want to get there, we have to be willing to go up that mountain again. And it's not the same mountain, it's a different mountain. It just sometimes feels like the same mountain that we have to deal with. I love that. That's some deep stuff. Okay. So my last question, that's some really good stuff. So I'm going to have to sit on a lot of this, but I'm like, I am in awe of you. You,
Oh,
God, you're just so amazing. I'm going to cry and it's going to be fine. Um, because I don't think a lot of us say that success is attainable and that it can be defined as whatever we want. We just tell ourselves we can't, and we stop right there. We can't do it because of foster care. We can't do it because of my trauma, because of my baggage or whatever reasons that we give. But you're saying, you're like, it is attainable as long as you want it. You can do it. Doesn't mean it'll be easy, but it's attainable. You can do it. So it's just like, that's I'm gonna walk away some tears and knowledge. But if someone wanted to do what you do, what advice would you give them?
in terms of my career.
Anything, all of it, whatever comes.
So life-wise, I would have to say is always being grounded. You
Mm,
know, I'm a very introspective person,
mm,
and I always thought about what I wanted, and
mm,
I would sit down and write it out and make a plan. And so the more methodical you are, it keeps you from making a lot of errors because you're thinking the long game, not right now, you're thinking long term. And so, really, that's how you get to it. Because when you sit down and you think about the end, now you can go to the front and say, that's how I'm going to get to that end result. And
yeah.
so, for me, like I knew I was going to be an educator, but in my mind, I want to be a superintendent. And
Mm,
so every decision that I've made for my career is because I want to have impact where I am. I want to have the knowledge base, and I have now a sense of expertise that they're yearning for, and so I know that that's marketable. And
mm,
so anywhere I need to go, I have opportunity because of the skills that I've acquired. So
mm,
that's kind of something that you have to really find your niche. You have to find the thing that makes you you,
mm,
and makes you a sense of value and purpose, and be intentional about that. And
mm,
that way, when you go to any space, they are really going to say, I need you here.
yeah.
And that gives you access to opportunities. And you continue to say, but this is my end goal. And
Mm,
you don't sit long where you are, you keep going. And when you get to one point and it doesn't look like that's what you want, Don't be afraid to pivot. And that's one thing that the pandemic taught us, the power of the pivot, and how even if it looks like we've always done it one way, it's okay to change course.
Yes, absolutely. I'm smiling because I use that. So have you seen Friends, the show?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, everybody listening, do you remember the scene in Friends where Ross is trying to get the couch up the stairs and he just keeps screaming pivot and over and over and over, pivot, pivot, and it's Rachel, it's Joey or Chandler, and it's Ross trying to get this couch up a stairwell that is a U. And I love this analogy, and I've talked about it in a few conversations that I have had, but it's like you can sit here in your life yelling pivot when there's a U-shaped thing with a couch and it's just not going to fit. But if you step back, and you said this, step back, sit and think about what you're wanting, plan it out so you're not aimlessly going. And if it's not what you want, pivot. But if you don't sit down first and say, ooh, this you that I want to do is just not going to make sense, it's just not going to go, how are you supposed to pivot? You don't know unless you sit down and say, this is the direction I'm in. And then what tends to happen is we say a lot of yeses to things that are taking us in the wrong direction. And I think that is so powerful to sit down and say, hey, you need to go with a purpose on purpose. You need to sit down and plan what you want. You're not just sitting down and manifesting this to happen. You're not wishing it to existence. You are sitting your booty down and you're going to say, plan it out. Is it possible?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But then I have to do the work to get there. And then you're saying, then when you see it and you're like, oh, this ain't what I want, I'm going to pivot a little bit, but you don't sit and plan that pivot. You're going to end up like Ross, Rachel, and Chandler in a stairwell that you can't move the couch in. And I love that. Like when I saw that, I just crack up when people are like pivot. I always think of that scene and I'm like, I have to figure out like this scene is life, you know, where it's like, if he'd listened to Rachel, they wouldn't have tried to push a couch that would not fit up this stair. But he was determined and they didn't say anything. And sometimes we're going to have friends who just don't say anything. But if we can sit back, plan it out, think it through, think long term. We're not planning out every step of every moment, but what we're saying is, okay, this is the end goal, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get there. And that's going to help me end up there on purpose. Now, if with the purpose changes that maybe I don't want to just be in teaching long term, maybe I now want to be a superintendent, I can pivot toward that and say, okay, now I need to go that way. And I want to be a policy changer. And it's good. And it's good for us to pivot. But I think so many times we're like, no, we can't make a change and we won't find happiness there. But it's okay to say, I'm not where I want to be yet. I'm grateful for the choices I have and the things I've learned along the way, but I'm just not there yet. And that's okay. And I love that you said that, because I'm just like, oh, firm believer, you can plan it, you can go for it, you can speak it into existence, but until you do the work, you're not going to get there. And I think we have understood that because we've had to do it.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, the other part of that is focusing on not only the goal, but I don't stop growing.
Yeah.
I'm in a continuous cycle of growing and soaking up knowledge. And life is this cyclical process. It's not so linear as you would think. And sometimes you see life come full circle and you can say, oh, I need to try it this way because I've seen that before. But then sometimes I've never had this before. I need to try to just absorb and be present in the moment and see where I'm going from there. And being open to the experience and not try to control everything. But as long as where you're going still gets you to where you're going, then ride the wave. And that's okay. But sometimes it feels like we just get lost in everything and we don't know what to do. And that's the part that we don't need to know. We just need to have the faith that if I am doing what I need to do, I'm doing my part, everything else is going to line up and keep going.
And I want to plug in, because this is just, I say this a lot, but we need to make sure it's legal the way that we're doing things.
Because, and ethical.
And ethical, because sometimes people are like, well, you said, I'm like, yo, we're going to make this little plug right here. It has to be ethical and it needs to be legal, because some people they will say that to you, like, no one's looking, but when you want to end up somewhere on purpose, you don't want the risk that comes with unethical behavior or illegal behavior, but you also don't want that to follow you. Like you said, you wanted people to know who you were based off of how you felt in college. Like you wanted people to get that same feeling when they're around you, to be known, to someone know your name and say, okay, this is how we do this. This is why we do this. And you're saying like that doesn't come with someone who's like, do it as shady as possible. Like you're doing it with a purpose. And that purpose is so anyone that comes in the room around you says, we need you in our corner because you know how to get us there. And you know us. And that's so different that I don't think a lot of people focus that way. And that's why they may not end up where they're looking to strive for, is because they're just like, I'm just going to show up and whatever happens, happens. But you're like, no, you got to show up with a purpose on purpose. And you got to learn, like, is that something I want? No. And I'm going to say no to that, but I'm going to say yes to this because it's in the direction I want to go in. But if it's not, I can change directions. It's totally okay. And I love that because I don't think we hear that enough at all. I don't think we hear that. I love it. I love it so much. Oh my gosh. Okay. Is there any other advice that you would like to give it to anyone, or any last words you would like to say?
Just accept who you are, be aware of who you are, and always remember who you are. And if you can do that, you will start to discover exactly why you are you. And that's the kind of person that whatever organization or space that you go into, that's why you're there. Because of the experience that you have, the knowledge that you bring, you are literally going to be a part of the guiding light to usher any organization into success. And it has to be you. That's why you're there.
Because that's what makes you different, is you being you, not you being like everybody else.
Absolutely.
We need to just have a shirt like, be you, because that's who we need, is you.
Yeah.
Not someone else. And I think we hear that in the foster care community a lot, is like, how can I make someone like you? And it's like, we're all needed in this, and you have to know who you are. And by finding out who you are, it's finding out what you like and dislike and what you want, and sitting down and planning that. And that's hard to do.
May I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a transparency moment, because today I was walking by and there was a young lady who I saw this organization in this building, and she said, did you need some help? And I said, I just wanted to know if you needed some volunteers. And so she said, yeah, actually I do. So she runs a foster care agency that supports kids that are aging out and helping them to get independent after they leave the system. And we just began talking. It turns out she was in foster care as well. And we made that connection. And the thing about life is, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, I would not have been able to have that conversation with her. Because when I first went to school, college, I went to a very historical Black college that had women who came from all walks of life, but a lot of them came from, middle and higher class families. And I felt inadequate. I was there. I was accepted. I was in classes. I stayed in the dorms, but my pedigree didn't align with theirs. And I felt like I didn't fit. And because of that, there were moments where I struggled with my own identity and who I was, where I came from, because I didn't want people to judge me or to think I didn't belong because of where I came from. But honestly, when I tell you that I could sit with who I am and I can accept what I have experienced, I have become self-aware. And yes, I have anxiety and I have things that I have to power through. But when I've gone to my boss and I said, hey, this is my experience. This is why I'm doing this at work. This is why I need these types of accommodations. This is why and I began to advocate for myself. And then I said, it's not so much that you don't belong, it's that you have to make the space you're in belong. You have to make it belong. You have to find, advocate, and do not, because you're worth it. Do not stop. So part of being in this system and trying to move through it is to understand where you might have lost some things and how you can make up for them as an adult along the way, but really knowing that it is not to your detriment. You just need to know how to honor what that is that you've experienced and be all the way transparent, be comfortable with being vulnerable, and truly accept that experience in your life. And so that way you can make good decisions that are going to better the future that you want to have. You cannot think that it's going to keep you from where you're going.
That's amen. I have nothing, I can't add anything to that, because that, yeah, that's where we're going to end, because that is, we need to sit on that. And I love that you said 10 years ago, I couldn't have that conversation, but I was able to have that conversation today, not today, but this week. And that's
today.
Oh, it's today? So right.
It was this morning. Yeah.
I love that though, but it is so, it's healing to hear that. Like, you need to be able to advocate for yourself so you can find that healing inside of you, to be able to say, okay, I found my voice again. And now I'm going to go advocate for the things that I want. And I love that. And I want to leave with that, because I don't want to ruin what you said. You said it like, I can't say anything else. I love that. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm going to be linking all of your information that you're comfortable with in the YouTube, so you guys can reach out to her in the YouTube. I sound like in the description of YouTube. That way, if you guys want to reach out, you guys can get to bring her into rooms with you. I think more teachers need exactly what you offer. More districts need to implement what you offer, because I don't think a lot of us do. I'm a professor at a university, and that's kind of the same belief I have, is like, we need to see the student holistically. They're in school online for a reason, and we can't sit here and not teach them. But not a lot of people believe that same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And then, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
We want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Foster Greatness. We equip foster youth by connecting communities and empowering individuals on their journey. We provide workforce development, master classes, travel abroad experiences, and individual and community support for foster communities. If you're interested in learning more, please visit fostergreatness.co. Thanks for joining us.